Hello, and welcome to this installment of the Future Grind podcast. I'm your host, Ryan O'Shea. Today, I'll be speaking with Australia's own Meow-Ludo Disco Gamma Meow-Meow. Meow, and yes, that's his real name, was crowned a true leader's game changer by the Australian Financial Review for his efforts to democratize science and technology. These efforts include co-founding Australia's first open-access molecular biology lab, BioFoundry, in 2014, and being the Science Party candidate for an Australian House of Representatives seat in 2017. Meow is currently at the center of a very important legal case that could set a precedent in the emerging field of cyborg law. He'll update everyone on this case during a talk he is giving at BDYHAX, the Human Augmentation Conference, which will be from February 2nd to 4th, 2018 in Austin, Texas. If you'd like to hear more about this or see any of the other speakers at BDYHAX, including yours truly, you can save 20% off your conference passes by entering code FUTUREGRIND at checkout at bodyhacks.com. But you'll have to hurry. This discount code expires on January 25th, 2018. As always, show notes and more are available at futuregrind.org. We're available on iTunes, Stitcher, and wherever podcasts are found. A video version of this episode is posted on Facebook and YouTube. Make sure to subscribe, and you can also like, comment, and share to spread the word. This is Future Grind. And now we are here with Meow. Meow, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
So you have experience in so many different areas, and we'll try to get into all of them throughout the course of this conversation. But to start, I'd love to find out more about you. What's your background, and how did you end up becoming such an evangelist for science and technology?
I was a mature age student at university. I went back when I was 22. And I studied undergraduate in genetics. I didn't really fit in super well to the academic kind of lifestyle. I enjoyed drinking at the pub, but not the way that I was kind of assessed. So yeah, it was a bit of like an ugly duckling. Didn't really fit in. It took me 7.5 years to graduate. And during that time, I realized that graduate employment for genetics students was only about 52% after 3 months. So I was a bit worried I wasn't going to get a job. And about halfway through my degree, I saw BioCurious was just starting. So I saw what those guys were doing and I got really excited because I was a geneticist and I enjoyed hacking. And I was like, oh, here's a movement I can jump onto. So that's how I started with the DIY bio stuff. 3 years later, we founded BioFoundry. I ended up dropping out of postgraduate uni to do BioFoundry, and that eventually became a full-time thing. And then through that, I got involved with Indie Bio. And while I was over there, I started to see the guys from Grindhouse Wetware, obviously, doing some cool grinding stuff, and I thought, oh, that's something I'd like to be a part of. And with the Science Party stuff, I had kind of gotten a bit of a profile doing BioFoundry things and doing the implant stuff, and they asked me to join the party as a person who was also very interested in how emerging technology can shape the country, not just individual people.
Well, that was a great overview of the many things that you have your hands in.
Yeah.
But how did you end up choosing to pursue biohacking over the academic or other traditional positions that you were on track for?
Yeah, so the thing that I got really frustrated with was I was really into mycology, the study of mushrooms. And everywhere I went, I was told I wasn't going to be able to research it because I kind of had to take on a research project underneath a supervisor doing something that they were interested in, not what I was interested in. And I was kind of a bit confused, like, why can't I just study this? And they said, oh, no one can teach you. The school doesn't get funding for that. So I got more and more disillusioned with the way that science was being done. And I started to say, well, you know, if I'm going to be teaching myself in a postgraduate thing, I may as well just teach myself in my own lab. I started to pull equipment out of dumpsters at uni. And by that stage, we had a regular group that was meeting. So, and then I got connected into the international DIYBio.org group that was set up by Nathan McCorkle and Mackenzie Cowell. And then all of a sudden I was part of this like small but dedicated group of DIY scientists connected from all around the world. And that was a really big eye-opening thing for me because there was heaps of research and other people were saying, join us and we'll help you. And we're all kind of in it together. And then I found my tribe, I guess. And that's grown since then.
Well, let's talk about that and get into BioFoundry, the open access molecular biology lab that you co-founded in 2014. You mentioned BioCurious, the Silicon Valley biotech hackerspace, as being an inspiration for BioFoundry. But how did that go from an idea into an actual physical lab?
Oh, man. Yeah, everyone always worries about the equipment. If you're listening to this and you want to start a DIY biospace, the equipment is the easiest thing. You say you're going to start a DIY biospace and every single person will be like throwing equipment at you. The hardest thing is building a strong, solid group of people that are dedicated, that will put in time, that will do what they say and meet regularly. And so we focused heavily on that in the beginning. We had like 2-3 years of meetings, and we got a really cool core group of like 12 people together. And across time, we eventually navigated the heavy Australian legislation that I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit further. And once we kind of wrapped our head around that, we put some money down. We each just pitched in out of our own pocket and set up a really tiny little space. It was like 12 square meters, and we got going. And then we've moved a few times since then, and now we've got like a certified lab. In America, you guys call it BSL1. In Australia, it's PC1. It's kind of similar, but there's some notable differences. Then it's just like, it just takes hours of work consistently all the time. It doesn't cost heaps of money, but the hardest thing is just getting a group of people that want to make like a third place outside of work and outside of home where they want to get together and do cool experiments. And like maintaining that across a long period of time is super difficult. And it's why I have a lot of respect for counterculture labs and BioCurious.
You referenced the heavy regulation imposed in Australia, and
Yeah.
I'd love to dive into that further. How did you navigate that, and what was that process like?
It's still ongoing. So Australia has some of the toughest gene control regulations in the world. We sat down, we've read multiple documents in excess of 100 pages, extremely technical. The penalties for doing something wrong, something that you could do in a non-BSL1 lab in America would land you in jail in Australia for 6 years. And the federal legislation goes after individuals, which is unusual. Normally federal legislation goes after companies, but in this case, it definitely goes after individuals. So there's a lot of risk that was taken on there. But we kind of have a bit less of an anarchistic kind of libertarian approach. So we work really closely with authorities and we're very transparent with them. But the benefit of this has been that they have stopped bioterrorism police from being involved with us. They have advised federal police that they know exactly what's going on with our lab. We give them tours and we work really closely with them. And the benefit is they've helped us navigate the regulation. So in Australia, that's the best way of us doing things. And it kind of clashes with some of the hackers in America because they have a lot more freedom. So they kind of want to keep a lot more freedom. So ideologically, we don't always align. A big example is kind of with like Josiah Zayner, the way that he does things. You could never do that in Australia. And there's some interesting crossovers if we're sending kits backwards and forwards because that can cause regulation problems. So that's something that we'll all navigate together across like the next 5 or 10 years, I guess.
You said there that you can't do things the way that people such as Josiah Zayner are, but Josiah still runs into some problems. Even though he has a PhD and his own biotech company, the Odin, he still sometimes finds it difficult to source materials because some companies won't verify him or his company as a, quote, legitimate research institution. Does the fact that BioFoundry is a certified lab eliminate those problems for you?
Yeah, so when we started, we had the same problems as Josiah, and now we're fully registered. So because the government kind of set the first rung of the ladder so high that by the time that we were able to set up our lab, we're almost not prevented from getting anything. We can basically order whatever we want. There's a whole heap of gene modification we can't do. We need the next level of laboratory. We're looking at getting that hopefully by the end of the year. If we get that laboratory, a PC level 2, we can legally do a lot of human GMO stuff. We can actually work in our PC1 level lab. We can do stuff with adeno-associated viruses, which is kind of like if I was going to do gene therapy on myself, that would be the one that I would do. And we've seen this work pretty successfully, as far as we know, with Liz Parrish from BioViva that will be speaking on a panel with me at BDYHAX Con.
Yeah, your talk at BDYHAX is something that I definitely want to discuss. But before we leave BioFoundry, what are some of the projects that you currently have going on there?
We picked up the open source insulin project, Open Insulin, from Counterculture Laboratories, and we've been running with that. So Alex Kelly is in charge of that at the moment. I'm being pretty boring, actually. I'm just teaching myself a lot of plant tissue culture stuff. So I'm just kind of getting myself up to speed because it's one thing I haven't really played with. But I'm super excited to use plants as a protein manufacturing device. So using them as little protein factories, because I'm also very interested in vertical farming. Not because I think it's a good solution for cities, but I think that it's a good solution for Mars. And all people seem to grow in vertical gardens is like leafy plants. And that's not really useful. Like, you don't want to just eat lettuce every day on Mars. Like, you're not going to complain if you're eating anything on Mars. But I'm thinking, can we use lettuce to do other things like, make our food, make our medicine, make our fuel, and all these other things that we can do without having to just exclusively grow bacteria all the time. Maybe there's better ways of manufacturing it. So that's the stuff I'm kind of interested in. There's Sushant is working with some bioplastics. So he's kind of melting down prawn shells chemically and reassembling them into biocompatible plastics. We're working on a couple, like just a little bit on some palm oil stuff. We also just brought a new executive onto the board of BioFoundry. So there's 3 of us now, and the executive is named Andrew Kirkby, and he set up his own open source chemistry lab. So now we've got the chemistry lab and the bio lab working in conjunction with each other, which means that he's also gone through all of his regulations. So it opens up the doors to what we can do. We've got accounts with Sigma, which is a really hard thing to get, and we maintain that relationship. The benefit of this is we get not the cheapest chemicals, but we have access to a huge amount of stuff that traditionally hackers don't have access to. And all we have to do is sign the forms and deal with it responsibly. So that's really like opened some doors, and I'm excited to see what the combination of the chemistry and the bio lab can do across this year 2018.
And I've heard rumors of work that BioFoundry has been doing in the field of lab-grown meat. Not necessarily growing the meat there yourselves, but working to overcome some of the roadblocks that are currently facing that industry. Are you able to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so that's a project we've been working on for a little while. It's a really difficult project. There's a lot to it. We've been doing a bit of research, and we've ordered some chemicals, getting ourselves ready for it. And we're not the only ones looking in this space, but what we're looking at is that you generally have to feed most animal cells, especially beef cells, fetal bovine serum. This is basically you get the fetus of a dead cow. So you kill the mother and you take the fetus and you put a needle into its heart, and as it dies, it pumps its blood out into a bag that gets filtered, and that gets fed to the lab-grown meat to cause it to grow. Because generally cells don't grow in a dish. Generally, if they do that, that's kind of cancer. So you have to convince them that they need to grow, and the way you do that is by using this fetal bovine serum. So that's like a terrible solution. It's very expensive. It's about 1,500 Australian dollars or 1,100 American dollars a litre. So we see this as a major roadblock into scaling and reducing the cost of lab-grown meat. So we've been investigating this for a while. It's a project I don't believe we're working heavily on at the moment. I think there's 3 people making slow progress, but it's also a very expensive and difficult project. So it's something that we'd love to be involved with, and if we can contribute to it, that'd be great. If we can successfully finish it, that would be even better.
That definitely sounds like a major problem that needs to be overcome. Lab-grown meat has a lot of potential, not just for environmental purposes, but also for ethical purposes.
Exactly right.
If we can source safe, cruelty-free meat without the ethical concerns of slaughtering animals, that's a game changer. But if we still need to kill animals in that process, that's an issue.
Well, I think lab-grown meat is something that will end up becoming successful when it can compete on price. Because most people that eat meat now would pay for an alternative if it didn't require animals to suffer, but everyone would pay for meat if it competed on price. So I think that there's like different levels of adoption, kind of like the way we had battery eggs, and then we had cage eggs. Cage eggs and free-range eggs, and most people bought free-range eggs, but some people still bought battery ones because they're cheaper. But if free-range eggs were cheaper, no one would buy battery eggs. Yeah, so I think those are the 2 different levels of adoption, but I think there's a huge market for like cruelty-free meat.
Absolutely, and that's something I'm very excited about. And switching topics a bit, you are interesting because you are involved with a few different types of what we often consider biohacking. Your work at BioFoundry is on the DIY bio side, and you also get into the technological augmentation, sometimes referred to as grinding. So what is your definition of biohacking, and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, definitely. So I remember looking at hip hop, and they said there was like 4 pillars of hip hop. And I thought there's all these people who are like eating supplements thinking they're biohackers when all they're doing is dieting. And I'm like, they're not us. They're like a different group of people. So I thought, how do we separate it? So I came up with 5 pillars of biohacking. So I think it's in no particular order: microbiology, molecular biology, bioinformatics, DIY equipment building, and grinding. And those are like the 5 core elements. And I think outside of that, it might still be cool, but it's not biohacking. So Sebastian Kochoba from New York, he always says that, like, what about like hacking ecology, hacking things at that scale? And I think that that's bigger than the biohacking we often look at, which is kind of individual animal type things. And I think that after speaking with Tim and Amanda in the at DEF CON, they were talking a lot about the difference between use and utility. So if you use your body the way it's meant to be used, which is kind of like dieting or like supplementing, that's kind of just not hacking, because it's just using your body the way it's meant to be used. Whereas hacking is like augmenting and adding and thinking about different ways of using it. And that's why I kind of separate the putting sunglasses over your eyes or whatever to make you see different colors of light, not really the same as like putting implantables in your body.
And you did take that step of actually implanting things in your body, and you got a lot of press attention for it recently. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but you had taken the chip out of an Opal card, which is the smart card that serves as your ticket for public transportation there, and implanted the chip in your hand, making it so that you could pay for and access public transportation with a wave of a hand. And the powers that be didn't look too favorably on that, is that right?
Yeah, so we brought Amal from Dangerous Things over for the launch of the Deus Ex Mankind Divided game with Bandai Entertainment, but it was meant to be this huge event where we were going to have an implanting salon. But while he was over, we started talking about how easy it would be to hack an Opal card, and he took one back and modified it and gave it to me. So I went and saw Joeltron, who's kind of a local body mod expert in Sydney. He put it in my hand, and I called the news and said, you guys interested in this? And they said, oh, yeah, we're really interested. And then after I got it done, they called Transport New South Wales for comment, and then like everything blew up quite seriously. So and it was kind of hilarious, because the funniest thing about the whole thing was it was funny that they cared so much. Because the big thing they were upset about wasn't that I put it in my hand, it was that I modified the card because it goes against their terms of use.
And what's interesting to me about this is that they actually tried to deactivate your implant while it was inside your body. They deactivated a card that was registered to you, but it wasn't the one that you implanted.
Exactly right.
So they actually tried and failed to stop this, which might encourage others to not register their cards either.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is that they said that they would never use our personal data against us when they said to everyone you had to register, and everyone said, we don't believe you. And that's the only reason that burner cards were even allowed, is because everyone said, we don't trust you. And the first chance they ever got to use my data against me, they did. And this actually stems into a much bigger issue of metadata retention in Australia. So this is why it's good to be involved with politics as well, is because you don't often get a chance to speak to politicians in a public forum about these things if you're just asking questions in the audience. But if you're running against them, every single time they show their face, you can continually push the issues you care about. And we have preferential voting in Australia, so we don't have first past the post. And what this means is that you number the candidates in the order that you'd like them to get in. And if your candidate doesn't get in, it goes to your number 2, and then your number 3, and your number 4. So you can actually cycle through everyone that you want to get in and then end with the lesser of two evils, and you'll still not vote in the person you don't want. Say, for example, you wanted to vote for the Transhumanist Party, which I imagine a lot of people who listen to your podcast would. They kind of have to weigh up whether they'd rather chuck their vote in for the Transhumanist Party as a protest vote, or whether they'd rather vote in one of the two bigger parties and actually have their vote count there. Whereas you can kind of have your cake and eat it too with the preferential voting system.
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk more about your involvement with politics and the Science Party, but first, let's get to the big news with the Opal card implant. During a recent trip, you were approached by 2 transport officers that were scanning cards to confirm payment. And despite the fact that you had paid by scanning your hand, you were fined $200 for not having a valid ticket.
Yeah.
And this matter has now been brought to court. So what's the update on that?
So I've been to court once. I entered a plea of not guilty. I'm going back to court on March 16th. The news will cover that one. We're going to be there for 2 hours, and hopefully it'll be resolved during that time. Regardless of the outcome of the case, there's actually more legal action I can take against them, because when they've written their legislation, they didn't write it thinking anyone would put it in their hand. And there's been legislative changes that have actually happened since the court case. So they've changed things, but I'm still charged under some of the old clauses. So I've got a fairly good chance of winning. I think it's really important for these cases to set really good precedent, so that if other people doing body modification are ever in court, for example, Rich had his kids taken off him, and in that court case, they actually used his modifications as reason to take kids away. So they were claiming that it was some sort of mutilation rather than augmentation. So I think it's good if every single person, if they ever are in trouble with the law, to really fight it and push the boundaries and make sure that the court cases come out in our favor. Because when other cases look for precedent, they're going to look for these cases. So it's important that we push it hard and win.
Yeah, that custody battle with Rich Lee was one that I was watching closely, and you're right. These are the court cases that are setting the precedent for how these things might be viewed in the future. And they are very important. And this is getting a bit into the subject of your body hacks talk, so I don't want to say too much on this right now. But there are people who view cases like yours as crucial to the future of cyborg rights. And that might be a heavy term to apply to these cases now, but you can definitely imagine the impending controversy about ownership, privacy, and rights when augmented humans have technology inside of them. There are a few different organizations around the world that claim to be focused on cyborg rights. Have any of them reached out to you or offered legal assistance or support?
Yeah, so I've spoken to EFF, and they said they would help hook me up with a lawyer. I've got a lawyer in Sydney that looks after me pretty well. I actually pay out of my own pocket quite a lot, though. It's costing me thousands and thousands of dollars to run it, which is okay. I don't mind, and I can afford it at the moment. But if I couldn't, EFF have offered to hook me up with a pro bono lawyer. The problem is they don't have anyone yet that specializes in cyborg law. There's Victoria Sutton, who's fantastic, but she specializes in American law. So at the moment, it's quite niche, and there's not a lot of people. I've got professors that in Australia that advise on my cases, but really at the moment, there's not a whole heap out there. So I think as it becomes a more commonplace thing, and we'll see it as we get more and more medical device implants that have things like, pacemaker batteries and things like that, where, they can change the terms and conditions. So you have to go and get your battery replaced more often and stuff like this. I think that we'll see more court cases. And when that happens, we'll start to get specialization within law that will actually, look for people like this and represent them properly. But right now it's kind of make it up as you go along.
And this Opal card itself, what was the process of turning it into an implant? What was the size and how was it implanted?
Amal did such a good job. So he took the IC out, and it was it's as flat as a credit card, maybe a little bit thinner. It's about the size of a fingernail, and then the antenna is about the same size, maybe a little bit larger. It's very flat. It sits just behind my pinky finger. In the past month, it's stopped becoming inflamed. Now I think I got this put in around April. So because it was sitting over a tendon, it was inflamed for a very long time. But now it's actually really comfortable. You can't see it. The end. So there's the IC and then there's the antenna, both about the same size, and the read range on it is really good. So I can read it from about a centimeter away. There's some basic issues with it. So I think because the shape and size of the antenna isn't what was designed to be used by the readers, maybe once in every 5 times it doesn't read. But I'm so incredibly happy with the implant design, and for a prototype implant, it was awesome. And it's encased in I'm not sure which plastic he used. It's a biocompatible plastic. I'm pretty sure it's been heat welded or chemically welded together. It's super robust. It's the same as the Flex NTs and the Flex DFs, and I absolutely love it. They are such great implants. If you can stomach it, I'd highly recommend anyone who's keen on grinding to get a Flex implant just because of how well they interact with technology, but not for the squeamish or the faint at heart.
How was the location behind the 5th digit or the pinky finger chosen for this?
So I spoke with Joltron, and we were talking about the different ways that I would interact with it. And we decided that either on the back of my hand, the side of my arm near my elbow, or where my watch kind of sits, all would have been good locations. And he said that the easiest probably would have been my hand. And we just ghosted the motions and saw how it would have looked, which one would have seemed most natural. And I'm glad I did, because I have a lot of flexibility in my hand, so I can move it exactly into the spot on the reader that it needs to hit. And the reader is reasonably powerful. So the combination of those two things means that often I can just walk through pretty effortlessly, and the gates will open for me, which is, it feels like you're living in the future when you do it. It's really cool.
Yeah, I imagine it would. But how do other people react when they see you walk by with the wave of a hand? Do they even notice?
Nobody cares. Seriously, as in, nobody even notices, because everyone is just so absorbed in their own daily experience. I think twice people have seen me, and I've had it for almost a year now. So and if I'm having a paranoid day where I don't want to be noticed, I'll just carry my phone in my hand, so it kind of looks like I'm swiping something else. But most of the time, no one notices. Even guards don't notice. They just assume that I've got something in my hand. So it's kind of interesting. It's almost like a magic trick that uses their own mind's deception to not notice it.
Ah, that's interesting. Taking advantage of the quirks of the human brain there.
Yeah.
So tell me about the other implants you have as well.
Yeah, so I have a little XNT on the back of my thumb. That was my first implant, and it's really cool. Like, I like it. It's kind of pretty fun. It's very convenient because it's on my thumb. I can move it around and lock it into position. And that's kind of I've got like a soft spot in my heart for that one because that was the first one I got, and I really pushed it and like tried to engage a lot of people with that implant and think about where this technology could go. And then I got a Flex NT that sits just behind my wrist. And I got that at the same time as my Opal card. And it's really useful because it's got such a big antenna. Almost anybody's phone can read it. So it's a really nice one when you want to introduce people into how easy to use the technology is, because the little glass bead chips, that they don't always read super well unless the antenna is perfectly aligned with the RF field. So by being able to just effortlessly tap someone's phone onto the back of your wrist and transfer information, you get that kind of wow factor where they're like, okay, I see how this is interesting and useful.
Do you have those NFC implants storing anything in particular or set up for any interesting applications?
It depends. If I'm developing, I'll do stuff with them. But at the moment, not much. I use the UID on there more than the actual data. So I use it more to authenticate rather than actually carry information. But I spent ages thinking about how you can use it in important ways. And for myself, I kind of went, my test is, could you replace that with a button? So if instead of having an implant, could I just have a waterproof button that did the same thing, like on my shower or on my front door or something like that? If the answer is no, then maybe it qualifies for an implant. So I think once we get payment on there, that's going to be a huge thing. I think for like identification, it's going to be a huge thing. I think like Bitcoin transactions, wallets, storing larger pieces of information will be really, really useful. Being able to like smuggle data internationally will be like huge, especially if you're going to like a country like North Korea, where you could take a lot of information with you that might be useful and deliver it without anyone ever knowing. Like plenty of grinders have walked through, like Tim walked through, German airport with like, giant, computer in his arm, and he didn't get pulled up. If that was a hard drive, how much information could you store on that and smuggle across boundaries? And if you were strategic about where you placed it, you could do some Johnny Mnemonic kind of data courier thing. So I think that will be a really exciting, cyberpunk thing that we'll see in the next 5 or 10 years, hopefully. But I think we're going to see like a lot of crossover between Internet of Things, blockchains and payment services and these devices, especially with VivoKey that comes out in the next couple of months, because it allows you to do two-factor authentication. It allows you to store, a megabyte of data, something around that size. So you can start doing some really powerful computing. And I know the Grindhouse kids are working on like, really extending the range of things like biometrics with some of the projects they're working on now, which is like, super, super exciting. And after speaking with Marlo, who's the CTO of the new company, Livestock Labs, some of his ideas for aesthetic augments have huge potential. And if they get even like, 1% of the stuff that they have in their brains out there, it is going to like completely blow the whole world away.
Yeah, I can tell you from the Grindhouse meetings that we have, there are a ton of ideas that we'd love to pursue, and the major barriers to them aren't even technical. They're things like time and resources and money. And with adequate amounts of those things, we could really make some waves here. And VivoKey from Amal Grafstra is another one I'm really interested in. Having a confirmed secure identity is hugely important, and will only become more so as techniques for hacking and spoofing improve.
It is. And I think that there's a synergy that exists between things like VivoKey and cryptocurrency blockchains like IOTA, which is a standardized Internet of Things currency, which is meant to unify not just the money exchange, but data exchange across all Internet of Things devices. So with these things working in conjunction in the same direction, you're going to allow exchange of information all the way across. We'll start to see things like your implants being able to, if you so choose, send information to your insurance company to take biometric data and then use it to adjust your insurance premiums. So I'm excited for those kind of synergies, where your devices aren't just like sending it to your phone, but actually, giving you more utility in the world, and that might give you more ease of use and benefits than people who aren't augmented. And that's where we'll start to see that divide between humans and augmented people.
I feel the same way. And the synergies, you mentioned blockchain there, and how implants could incorporate blockchain technology to improve our experiences and transactions.
Yeah, definitely.
I love that idea. And while we're talking about blockchain, you've been teaching some introduction courses on that and cryptocurrencies recently.
Yeah.
When did you first get into this world, and how did you first see the potential impact and benefits of it?
Yeah, I've been watching blockchain since like 2010. So I was like really, really almost early adopter of Bitcoin. I was going to buy or hold a Bitcoin just before Mt. Gox got hacked. And then I said it wasn't mature enough. And then I started getting back in when Ethereum started taking off. And I was like, okay, here is like, a blockchain that can do something. I started getting interested in developing for it. And now I'm really heavily interested in crypto assets. I think this is a really cool concept because these are like, we're starting to see decentralized apps. And that's kind of the big theme for this year, I reckon. People can create applications. The big one that I've been following is CryptoKitties. It's kind of like Beanie Babies for the blockchain, but they're not just static thing. You buy a Beanie Baby, it sits on the shelf. This allows you to like breed your Beanie Babies together and create new Beanie Babies, which is really exciting. And those assets are owned by you. They're not owned by the company that made CryptoKitties. So all the company does is bring new cats into existence that are the first generation ones, and they make their profit from selling those. But every kitty afterwards is a decentralized asset that lives on the blockchain, and you can have ownership over it. So it works kind of like a coin or a token, but each one of them has unique attributes. Now, the benefit of this is that the crypto assets can be used by multiple things. So if you bought a CryptoKitty from their website, you could actually like import that into The Sims, or you could import it into a virtual reality because you own that crypto asset. And this is really cool because all the IP you generate in games, once we see a move towards decentralized apps, you're going to be able to like port across to other platforms. So if you maybe win a gun or a skin in Call of Duty, maybe you'll be able to import it to Star Wars or, another game like that. Or you might be able to like have it displayed on your shelf of your house in your VR home. And I think that, these dApps are really cool because all of a sudden you free the IP from being siloed within the individual person that owns that game, because all of a sudden you own everything in that game now.
As an educator in this space, is there a specific coin or application of blockchain technology that you're most excited about?
For coins, Ray blocks, I'm really excited about this year. So it and IOTA are both moving towards this thing called fast, feeless, and minerless blockchains. So I just did some transactions in Ray blocks. They were 6 seconds and they cost $0. Yeah, the mining is kind of done by your browser. So we're moving away from blockchains into this thing called Hashgraph and block lattices. So I'm really excited for this like reimagining of blockchains, this move away from like environmentally damaging proof of work. And I'm really interested in seeing good uses of the blockchain, because I think the big problem at the moment is that there's a lot of people making companies and coins for things that don't need to be decentralized. They actually work better when they're centralized. And we always want to think that a decentralized model works better, but it doesn't always work better. I'm excited for crypto identity. So like, passports that don't necessarily have a country attached to them. I think we'll see a huge benefit to people like refugees that maybe are stateless, but they still need some way of identifying themselves. Maybe we'll see, a retinal scan incorporated into a private key, or maybe a 12-word seed phrase and retinal scan that will like verify their identity so they can still move between countries and refugee camps. Even though they don't have a country, they still have that sense of identity tied to some information on the blockchain. And that can be handled by all different types of organizations and countries without anyone having to own it and verify it. I think crypto marriages is going to be really cool when people kind of reject the government. They decide to make their own marriages, whether they're like polyamorous or, if you're living in a country where you can't have same-sex marriage or marriage equality, you might want to have your assets divvied up by smart contracts and things like that, instead of having them just assigned by the government. And then if you divorce, you have to go and, go through a huge lengthy process. You can just divvy up your assets on the blockchain.
Can you give an example of a few of the things that you mentioned would be better centralized and that you see people trying to decentralize for no reason?
There's heaps. So file sharing is a really good one, right? Or it's better not on a blockchain. Sorry, not centralized, but not on a blockchain. There is, say for example, government services are probably better centralized because they're faster. Medical data is actually really good when it's centralized because it's often huge. It's not so much about the security, because you can get the security even if it's centralized. But if you want to send x-rays across the internet, it's probably better to do it across like a private network than it is across a decentralized blockchain. Because the problem is, if you fill the blockchain with heaps of data, every time you want to use it, it's going to be really slow. So anything where you're going to be moving huge amounts of data across, it's probably better to have, a VPN or centralized server, or a couple of centralized servers that are owned by one group. Those are probably the big ones. Yeah, anything where you're chucking huge amounts of information. You can use a blockchain to access and unlock that if you wanted to, if you really like the security aspects of it. But blockchains are slow and clunky as a general rule. We're starting to see a change in that with IOTA and Ray blocks and a few of these other ones that are coming out. But yeah, I think like ask, would it be better to do it with a database? So if you were one company and you completely controlled something, like an industry body that maybe looked after a whole heap of records, you would never need to decentralize that. I saw this thing like DentaCoin, which is like dentists blockchain. Like, I think that is really stupid. Finally a cryptocurrency for dentists. I see a lot of people solving things that aren't actually problems, I think. There was this one Spank coin, which is like, an adult industry coin. And I just went, hasn't this already been kind of solved? There's a lot of adult industry websites out there. And there's already, a whole range of blockchains and cryptocurrencies for doing really fast, efficient, feeless exchange. Why do you need to invent another coin to solve a problem that kind of didn't exist?
Okay, I want to talk a lot more about crypto, but we have some other topics that we need to cover, and I know we don't have much time, so I'm going to force myself to move on here. You recently ran for the Australian House of Representatives under the Science Party banner.
Yeah.
How did you first get involved with the Science Party, and what made you want to run for office?
Yeah, so I'd always been interested in politics and thought it'd be really fun to run as an independent or with a party, but didn't find anyone that really ideologically aligned with what I was about. And then I found the Science Party and found like a lot of crossover and met all the people in there. And the Science Party came out of the Future Party and the Transhumanist Party in Australia fusing together. And it's been like quite a rocky journey, but I think everyone feels pretty satisfied about where things are now. And we actually do pretty well. We kind of do the best of the rest. So after the big parties, we kind of scored just below them. The next election will probably be the most important. I kind of got drawn into it because I was doing a lot of stuff with media and, wanting to have a lot of say in the way that things are done and kind of change the narrative away from like, jobs and education into things that I really cared about, which is like, energy, future technologies, kind of using technology to make everyone's lives better and really focusing on that instead of just the same old narrative. So I found Science Party, really cool group of people, really passionate about making change. And the thing that inspired me was data-driven policy. So we look to see where experiments have been done and try and run that here and run a series of experiments, see what works. Even if you don't like the outcome, you kind of have to look at the data and acknowledge it. A lot of the parties in Australia are very ideologically driven. So, for example, the Greens Party is very pro-environment. And the problem with this is that when you get things like nuclear power that are demonstrated to actually be really safe and good for the environment, the ideology stops you from being pro-nuclear. And that was why I could never go with the Greens. They're also anti-genetic modification, even though it's better for the environment.
And here in the United States, we had Zoltan Istvan run for the presidency in 2016 under the Transhumanist Party. And he'd be the first to admit that he didn't stand much of a chance in that race. I think he said that himself when he was a guest on episode 4 of this podcast. But by running, he gained press attention for transhumanism and longevity research.
Yeah.
Is that part of the goal for some of the Science Party candidates as well? Or do you feel that winning these elections is actually within reach?
Yeah, so the next election, we could actually win a seat on the Senate, which is massive. And we definitely want to win seats. But the best case scenario for us is like, if we don't get seats, to write good policy that other parties take on board. And we know that they read our policy. And we get huge amounts of support for our policy. And as long as our policy is adopted, no one really cares. Like, I don't think anyone in the Science Party is crying that they're not a politician, because we all do startups and research that we really, really enjoy. We'd love the opportunity to be a politician, but it's also not a number one pick of job. We're doing it more to make the change that we are lacking seeing when we look at traditional narrative. But I think it's a multifaceted approach. Anything that brings awareness is always going to achieve the goals that you're after. So like, I obviously have like, a whole heap of different things that I do, and they all feed into each other. So getting press on one thing actually bolsters my work that I do somewhere else. And I think a lot of people in the Science Party feel kind of the same way. So Peter Zing, who is head of the Transhumanist Party before we fused, he's also doing a similar thing. He's got his hands in like 3 or 4 different pies, but they all lead towards his like goal of creating the future he wants to see.
Are you planning to be a candidate again in the future?
Yeah, so I'll be running in the next election. I'm probably going to run in the same electorate that I was running in before, which is a country electorate. So it's a rural seat. The benefit of this, though, is that it's actually one of the most connected electorates in Australia. So they have fiber optic broadband across one town in the electorate and a few little places outside of that. The benefit of this is that you've got 100 megabit fiber, which is unheard of in Australia. And it's kind of accessed by farmers. And I see this as a really good opportunity to start doing things like Mars farming research, to think about what does farming look like in the future. And it's a little bit supported by the traditional parties, but not really. They're really focused on mining, which is okay, but it's the wrong kind of place to do it in Australia because that's our food bowl. It would be better if they did it in kind of the remote Western Australian desert where there's nothing there. So you may as well just mine. Whereas, this is really beautiful arable land that's hyper productive. So I think maybe we should send drones, automate farming, do all these types of things there.
Well, with your interest in ag tech, it sounds like that might actually be a good constituency for you.
Yeah, so we got a ton of support. I did really well there, and it's the problem with politics. It's a huge, long campaign. When you finish one election, even if you get elected, you're already kind of campaigning for the next one. And you see it especially in the American race, right? Someone gets elected, and the whole cycle just begins again about bolstering votes for the next election. So it's it's a huge time sink. It's very exhausting. It's expensive. Money literally buys elections. You can buy an election in Australia for about $2 million. We know because rich people have gotten into politics where they've done exactly that. And you can do really well, but unless you have the time and the manpower to actually go out and convince all these people, it can be really difficult. And that's even with TV, radio, going to all the forums and things, because you've got 100,000 people you have to reach, and that's very difficult. And that's why having a high media presence before you even go in is huge. And if you have money to be able to post out to every single person a message about what you're doing, you can really, start to convince huge groups of people to align with you because they also feel the same way about the things you care about.
As you mentioned earlier, you'll be coming to America soon. You'll be speaking at BDYHAX, the Human Augmentation Conference in Austin, Texas in early February 2018. And you'll be speaking on the topic of cyborg rights and regulations. We touched upon this a bit with your Opal card court case, but I'd love to hear a preview of some of the things you'll be discussing there.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is this is going to be just before my court case. It's a really interesting time where we're just getting into this space of being able to work out, how much bodily sovereignty do you have? How do laws change when you start modifying yourself, both electronically and genetically? I think Liz Parrish's really interesting case about self-experimentation and what the rights and responsibilities of the augmentee are, especially in Australia where we have socialized healthcare. If I choose to modify my body, is the state responsible for fixing it if I go into emergency? Because at the moment, if one of my implants stopped functioning and I had to go into emergency, the taxpayers have to pay for my modifications to be removed or fixed. And the same would happen if it was genetic as well. And this starts to change the burden from my rights to what does the country owe me as well. And I think this will be an interesting space in Australia once we start to see this. And Australians have a strong history of experimenting on themselves. So that will be an interesting conversation. One of the things I'm most interested in, we'll be talking a little bit about, is that the internet kind of ended up going to the companies. It started out as an open source, heavily hackable, in the hands of the programmers kind of environment. And eventually it kind of, we got Web 2.0 and it kind of got sold to the Amazons and the eBays and the PayPals. But grinding and body modification and DIY medtech is still in this space where it's entirely controlled by hackers. So what can we learn from what's happened before to kind of make the future even better this time with a new technology? And then biotech is the next kind of one after that, I think. So I'm interested in, how do we as a group make sure that we push things the right direction to make sure we get the best outcomes for everyone?
And you're right. In a country with universal health care, or even one without it, emergency medical attention could be provided at taxpayer expense to a biohacker who faced complications from an augmentation or experiment. But there is precedent for this that has existed for years. Risky behavior is nothing new. Motorcyclists who don't wear helmets, recreational drug users, athletes, and people with unhealthy eating habits all make choices that could harm them at taxpayer expense. So I'm not sure why we should treat biohacking any differently than these other circumstances. But it is worth talking about. Do you have any proposed solutions for this? Should taxpayers cover your medical costs for biohacking gone wrong?
Well, they would have to pay for me. The question is about whether that's ethical or not. But like we have a great healthcare in Australia, so you would just be looked after. The question is like, at what point, if people were modifying themselves, would that start to become a drain on the system because of problems that happened? And if someone killed themselves, by accident, how would that impact our accessibility to even doing it in the first place? So I think that the whole field needs to be navigated with our eyes open and working with authorities as much as we can while still retaining some sense of like sovereignty about what we want to do irrespective of what authorities feel. And I think that's going to be a really difficult thing to navigate. There's also Stellar, who's going to be coming along. And, some of the artists that are in this space were like the really early pioneers. He had an ear grafted onto his arm. So he's actually kind of paved a way. And I'd be really interested to hear what he has to say on if something went wrong, whether he would feel ethically obliged to, say, for example, pay extra for private healthcare, or whether he thinks it would be okay. And it's like kind of, a duty of society to pay for artists to go and push these boundaries and see how that goes. And so his whole body of work revolves around the obsolescence of the physical body, which is kind of interesting in the context of this. So, and he'll be speaking at BDYHAX as well. So it'd be fantastic to, at some point, to actually grab him and ask for his thoughts, because he's been thinking about this since the 70s.
Yeah, Stellark will be around at BDYHAX, another one of the great speakers they have. I'll be there talking about hacking humanity with artificial intelligence. We have Rich Lee and Liz Parrish, who were already mentioned, attending as well. So it's going to be a great event.
There's some great parties going on there too. It's going to be an absolute blast of a weekend. I'm really looking forward to it. I love America. I haven't been there in 6 months, so I'm super keen, especially I've never been to Austin, so I'm really excited. I heard it's like a really funky place, and to be there with the coolest cyborgs in the world, I can't think of a better weekend.
Oh, it is. Austin is a great place. I can't believe you haven't been there, but I'll make sure to take you to a bunch of the good spots, and it'll be a great time.
Awesome.
But before we wrap up, I know I'm going to get a bunch of tweets and messages if I don't ask about this, but for the people who don't know you, Meow-Ludo Disco Gamma Meow-Meow.
Yeah.
Where did that name come from?
In short, I kind of just picked it when I was like 20, and I'm 33 now, so I just wanted to change it since I was in high school, and then that want kind of never went away. And my friends and I kind of just sat down. We wrote out a list of names that we thought would be entertaining, and we picked one that was good, and then I changed it, and then I was going to change it back like a year later, and then it just kind of stuck. And then now everyone calls me that. My dad calls me that. A lot of the meows came from watching a lot of Super Troopers. There's a scene where they say meow a lot. And then the rest just came out. We just sat around writing down lists. And then it's kind of cool. It's like a blessing and a curse to have a unique name. It's very easy for people to find out like everything about you, but that's like also terrible. Like I've been into job interviews where they like Google and they don't like everything they see. And now it's kind of cool. I've got like hundreds of articles about stuff I've done. So it kind of like, swamps the Google search with like the highest hitting stuff. And then like, my old MySpace account is like harder to find.
Yes, it's definitely not hard to find you online. You are optimized for search engines.
Yeah, that's right.
Where did the Ludo come from?
Oh, that's from the Labyrinth. My friend, it was his favorite character, and he was Opal when we were picking the name, so he chucked it in. The hilarious thing, though, is that every time you log on to any service, you can just type in your name, and you automatically get that username, which is probably the best thing. Like, I never have to think about what my username is, and if someone takes it, I am, like, ropeable. I'm like, I will hunt you down and kill you. I don't know who you are, but I'm very good at research. I was at university for 7 years. I will find you.
Well, I really enjoyed it because when you got a lot of press attention for the Opal card implant, I heard a few of the news anchors call you Mr. Meow-Meow during their coverage, and that made me very happy.
I think one news anchor said meow 5 times in a row, just like in general parlance, and I was like in tears. I'm like, do you listen to yourself? Do you know how ridiculous it sounds when you say stuff like that? Yes, it's pretty good fun. And I've been pulled over by police and they've like checked my license, but no one has ever like done this Super Troopers meow thing with me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I made it so easy for you. All you had to do was just say license and registration meow.
So now that we've established that you're easy to find online, where would you like to direct everyone to keep up with you and your work?
Yeah, so the easiest way to follow me is to jump onto Facebook and just follow my profile. There's also a foundry.bio website. So foundry.bio is a great way to like keep tabs on the lab. You can also jump onto BioHacks Sid, which is our Facebook group. And that's kind of where we do a lot of our discussion, and also our BioFoundry page. Most of my communication, though, is just done on mainstream media in Australia. So like I generally share that on my wall, and people share it from there. But that's probably the easiest way. And like if you like all the BioFoundry and BioHack Sydney pages, you'll keep up to date with what we're about. And please, if you're interested, jump into the conversation. There's heaps of great hackers in Australia, and we love being internationally connected.
I'll make sure to put links to all of those in the show notes at futuregrind.org. But speaking of your Facebook, I noticed you've been going live in virtual reality and posting videos with other people as avatars in a virtual environment, which I'm really excited by. What has your experience been with that?
Yeah, so I'm actually up in Brisbane at the moment working with a company called Equal Reality, and they're doing cognitive bias training using VR to make you aware that maybe you might be racist or sexist in a workplace in ways you hadn't thought about before, and you actually take on the role of an avatar. While doing that, I'm working with some Brennan and Annie, who are absolutely amazing VR developers, and we've been experimenting with all the things that you can do inside VR, and this is a really big year for VR. This is the year that VR stops becoming a gimmick and starts being something that people use a lot. So we've been playing around with Facebook Spaces. Now, Facebook bought Oculus Rift, and they didn't just buy this, on a whim. They have a distinct plan for it, and you can access the beta version of it. So you kind of you exist in this 3D photosphere where you're sitting around a table, and there's all these tools, and one of the tools is a mobile phone inside VR. So you can be across the world from each other, existing at like a table in the same virtual environment, pick up a phone, and then you can hit live stream, and then you can live stream from inside the virtual environment, which is super fun. The experience of being inside the Facebook VR space is so tripped out. Like I've watched the videos, but it's nothing compared to actually like being inside and interacting with the outside world. You can do things like pull up your Windows or Mac desktop from inside there. There's things like I might be able to see my desktop and other avatars can't. But I think we're going to see more and more like conferencing. We're going to see people from around the world casually interacting in these environments more and more so as the year goes on. And if anyone ever wants to jump on, please hit us up. And if you want to do like conferencing from inside there or see what it's like, basically let us know in advance, and we'll try and work out a time and all jump in, because it is so fun and exciting, and we love every time we do it. It's really cool as well. When you speak, the mouths of the characters automatically move, and it just picks it up from like the microphone that's on your computer. So it's a really crazy experience, and the ability to be able to like create 3D images inside there with a pen and then share it to your Facebook wall and do all these like amazing things that no one had dreamed about before this Facebook Spaces existed is awesome. So there's like 20 different things that I learned from just being inside there and hanging out. The coolest thing though is that if you know someone else in there and you share that space together and they can teach you what to do, you pick it up very quickly.
That's so great. I am definitely going to be joining you in Facebook VR. It looks amazing. And there's so much exciting innovation coming out now with Facebook.
Yeah.
They're taking big strides with video and interactive 360 images. So much to look forward to.
Yeah, that's it. And Snapchat do dog recognition. So if you take a photo of your dog, it brings you up dog-only filters, which is cool. And, this is also feeding into things like Google's neural net, and then the capture codes that everyone is like, identifying, what is a street sign, what is a car. All these things are working towards that, that final singularity godlike entity that we're probably going to create in like 20 years. Hopefully I can upload myself along the way.
Well, I can't think of a better place to end this than with a teaser to the godlike entity that looms before us. But I'm sure we can continue this conversation in person in Austin, and perhaps on another episode of the Future Grind podcast as well. So it's very late there in Australia, and I'll let you go. But thanks again for speaking with me.
It's been my absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me. I look forward to doing it again.
Hey everyone, Ryan O'Shea again, and thanks for listening to my interview with Meow. Remember to check out our show notes and more at futuregrind.org. You can also like, comment, and share to spread the word. Once again, Meow and yours truly will both be speaking at BDYHAX this year. You can save 20% off your conference passes by entering code FUTUREGRIND at checkout at bodyhacks.com. But hurry, this discount code expires on January 25th, 2018. Get your passes and we'll see you in Austin on February 2nd. Till next time, this is Future Grind.